Hello, Music Ally Focus listeners. I hope you're well. And this week we are sharing an episode from our other podcast, The Price of Music. Yes, we thought, sure, why not have two of them? And we think it'll be of special interest to you. I'm Joe Sparrow, Music Ally's managing editor, and this week we bring you two very special guests. We have Lord Brennan of Canton, the Labour member of the UK's House of Lords, and Shain Shapiro, founder of Sound Diplomacy and executive director of the Centre for Music Ecosystems. They're here to talk about a topic that we know from chatting to you over the past year or two that is of extreme interest to you. The future of the UK's live industry at the grassroots level and the fan experience associated with being a music or a live music fan. That means we're going to talk about ticket pricing, grassroots venues, music fan associations and more. And it's all built on the results of the UK's fan-led review of live and electronic music, the House of Commons Committee special report that Shain and Lord Kevin Brennan will be discussing later today in the real world, outside of the podcast, at the Music Cities Convention in Hull in the UK. So we chat with Kevin first about the report and what we can learn from it. And then we chat to Shain, who adds some fascinating insight into how we as music fans can make local change happen. As ever, the Price of Music Superfan subscribers get about 50% extra chat this week, the full unedited conversations with both of those guests. If you'd like to join our growing superfan community, you can find the Patreon link in the podcast notes, or if you can write things down quickly, it's patreon.com/The Price of Music. All right, let's get speaking to Lord Brennan and Mr. Shapiro. So once again, we're happy to welcome Lord Brennan of Canton to The Price of Music. And as a reminder, not only is he a Labour member of the UK's House of Lords, but he's also a musician himself. You'll find him on your preferred streaming service to check out his music. Hello and thanks for joining us, Kevin.
It's a pleasure.
Great to have you here. Now, you joined us last in October 2025, and that was when the UK government's fan-led review of live and electronic music was launched. We're very happy to have you back again, and this is ahead of you speaking in depth about that review on the 10th of June in Hull at the Music Cities Convention organised by Sound Diplomacy. So if you're in the region, you can check that out. And of course, this is something that our listeners are particularly passionate about. We get letters and, well, not letters, we get emails about this all the time. And this independent live music review was a huge undertaking, right? It was 4,000 survey responses, round tables around the UK, a fans charter being created. Yep. So this is a big piece of work. I just wanted, before we dive into that, I'd like to just set a bit of context on the impact that reviews like this can have. So if we can take a quick step back to rewind a couple of years when you oversaw or were very strongly involved with the UK government's music streaming inquiry and report. And there was a lot of suggestions in that about how music streaming could work differently for artists, and how labels interact with it and things like that. How did that translate into change? Because there was a sort of similar process here.
Yeah, I mean, to be technically correct, it wasn't the government's review or inquiry. It was the select committee's review. So it's in effect, it's Parliament doing an inquiry and then saying to the government, "This is what we think. What's your response to what we've got to say about this?" And you're right. The economics of music streaming report was a very, very, chunky piece of work by a select committee to undertake. And I think lots of people acknowledged it was pretty groundbreaking. And it came up with a series of recommendations. The overarching thing was it called for a complete reset in the music industry in the way that streaming and the economics of music streaming worked. And under that, there were a series of quite significant recommendations about it, including something called equitable remuneration, which I think for the sake of the lay listener is basically just making sure musicians got paid more, from the money generated from streaming, but also lots of other things like giving musicians the right to revoke their contracts after a period of time and get their rights back and get their music back, as is the case in America, and also improvements on things like data and the way that data is processed and shared, so have some transparency about what's happening with your music and whether you should be getting paid more than you are already. So there were listeners can read it for themselves. But there was a very significant number of recommendations. In fact, I was just reading the draft of Haley Bosch's second edition of her book, Copyright in the Music Industry. Haley's, a real expert in this area, and she's got a new chapter in that book, which I was just reading, reviewing that streaming inquiry and looking at what were the outcomes from it. And I think, if I'm truthful, the outcomes were we didn't get the complete reset we were looking for, but we did get some positive tweaks around the edges, and it did generate some important things like, better data and things like, for example, the for the first time ever, the agreement of paying per diems, daily rates for songwriters who are commissioned by record labels to write with some of their artists and so on. So there were some definite benefits that came out of it. Did we get the radical shake-up that the Select Committee was talking for? I think probably the answer is no, but there's still ongoing work, and that, I think, the ripples, if you like, from that Select Committee inquiry are still going on. But other things then tend to come along, with technology, as we know, and with AI, which we're not on about today, but with that coming along as well, that provides further challenges to the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's, I guess, the snapshot there is that these big overarching pieces of work can have substantial change, but that change can be quite slow, or it can sort of fade in as things change in the real world slower than what we want.
Absolutely, and things don't happen until they do happen. That's the way it works in politics and in public policy areas. And music is governed by a lot of rules around copyright and so on that are, in the purview of policymakers, and we can make a difference to them. And I think you've just got to keep ploughing away on these things and try and get change for the better. And my mission has always been to make that change that goes in the favor of better creator remuneration. That's at the heart of most of the things that I do around music in politics.
The kind of sentiments that will resonate well with our audience. Let's talk now about the fan-led review of live and electronic music. This was a special report, so this is a similar starting point to the one you just described. I'll link to this. There's beneath the podcast, there's a really good overview there and the full report as well to have a look at. I know you're going to be talking about this in a couple of days, but what are the key takeaways when you got all that information back and processed it?
Well, what I try to do is to obviously this is to reflect what fans have told us. So this isn't reflecting back necessarily what every industry body might think about it. It's really meant to lean in, as the football fan-led review did, to what the views of fans are. And what was quite interesting, really, I think about it, was that overwhelmingly lots of the things that they care about are very practical things. They're not airy-fairy things at all. And I boiled it down, really, having done all these roundtables, talked to people, looked at all the surveys, to what I'd call the 7 essentials of live, the things that fans really, really care about when you talk about live music. And they are very, very practical things. For example, that what they are, just to trot through them quickly, celebration. It's fans want us to embrace live music, not just as a money-making activity, but as a public good, something that's good for society, that's good for people, it's good for our mental health, it's good for our welfare, it's good for our communities. Ticketing, they want fair, open, transparent, ticketing practices and an end to the sorts of rip-off practices that we all are familiar with. The grassroots, they want to nurture, grassroots music venues and musicians at the grassroots level for its own sake, but also then as an incubator, obviously, for future success for musicians and for the industry. Safety, they care about prioritizing, protecting fans from harm when they attend live events. Accessibility, they care about making sure that gigs and concerts and so on are accessible to everyone, and that everybody involved in live music should think about that and act accordingly. Transport, key thing for lots of fans. Getting to and from gigs, particularly getting away, often from gigs, and making that a central part of transport policy, thinking about live music events. And the last one was to have a voice for fans, to make sure that their concerns are actually listened to. They're not the last person on the list that's consulted about anything to do with live events, and to promote and support the voice of fans. So that's really how it boiled down for me, from this kind of year-long piece of work that we've been doing.
And I guess there's not there's no enormous surprises on there but it's great to have all this stuff pulled together in one place and say, like, look, this is a representative selection of the fans' voices. And actually, you're already, by focusing it like that, it's sort of more clear how changes can be made around things like transport. These are things that we can picture happening. Before we sort of break those down a bit further into certain areas, you've also recommended the creation of a formal music fans association, which gives fans, the idea would be to give fans power in decision making. There was a similar thing, of course, with a similar football thing many years ago, which was quite effective. So how would that work structurally?
Yeah, it's a bit trickier in some ways in music, because obviously with football fans, you support a club, don't you? You support a football club. We've just seen that this week with the Champions League and the Premier League title and all that, the fanaticism of football fans. Music fans are fanatical, yes, about the artists that they love. They can also be fans, obviously, of the venues that they attend. There's a different kind of fandom sometimes involved in music. And maybe that makes it a little bit more difficult, because with football, this fan-led voice emerged, I think, really out of some of the disasters of the 1980s, of things like Hillsborough, and all those sorts of things. It brought people together. The legislation the government passed then to restrict, the sorts of activities at football matches about football hooliganism and all that kind of thing, really, I think, made fans have to generate their own voice. I think we need something similar in music. There isn't a collective voice for fans that are expressing the sorts of things that we found out from this review. And what I've suggested in the report is that the government should initially scope this, sort of give it some seed funding, but really in the longer term, as within football, it should be picked up by the industry itself. These things are not horrendously expensive and overall are going to save you money if you're actually meeting the needs of your consumers and your customers, and listening to their voice and responding accordingly. My view is that's only for the good of everybody involved in the live music industry. So it's a tricky thing. I think there are some local initiatives which could grow into more of a national, music fans association. But that's the sort of thing I think would really help that element, which I said, one of the 7 essentials of live voice, the fan's voice being heard and acted upon.
The parallel between football and music is really useful in some ways, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter if you're a fan of Arsenal or Manchester City, or if you're a fan of a very local, small, lower league team, you're essentially you're doing the same thing. It's just the parameters are a bit different. And that's the same whether you're a Taylor Swift fan, you go to Wembley, go with 90,000 other people to Wembley Stadium for a show, or if you love going to the Stoke Sugar Mill and paying £10 and going in on a Tuesday night to watch some bands, the experience is essentially the same from the perspective of that person.
Yeah, and I suppose in some ways, music, I feel in some ways from when I was a youngster, is less tribal than it used to be. I think people are more open-minded in a way across different genres. When I was growing up, you either liked David Bowie or Mark Bolan, but you wouldn't like one. But that's a ridiculous when you think about it.
If you talk to, I can use this phrase now, young people these days, they don't seem to have any artists they truly dislike. Like I remember when I was younger, it was. Everybody disliked Fleetwood Mac. They were just sort of the sign of for my
I'd rather
generation.
Jack than Fleetwood Mac. Wasn't that was
that's right. That's right. Yes,
hit record at one time.
Hazel Dean, I can't remember. But they stood for something you rebelled against, and now everyone likes Fleetwood Mac, and it doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about ticketing and dynamic pricing and things like that, which is something which I think if you talk to any fan is one of the high things on their list. The report called out the market dominance of the large companies in ticketing, and there was also mention of the Competition and Markets Authority to take a look at those corporations and see what they're doing. And there was quite a hard line in there against the dynamic pricing, the surge pricing, and there was a call for, as we've heard in recently in politics elsewhere, a ban on ticket resale above face value. This is one of those things that every fan has an opinion on, and generally they're united. They don't like it, right? The live music industry, though, is going to say, well, dynamic pricing is standard free market economics. we're capturing artist value for the artists. But the report pushes back clearly on that. So, first of all, what are your thoughts generally about ticketing and pricing at the moment?
Yeah, I think for me, the key word in all of this is transparency. And that's what's largely missing from the equation when it comes to ticketing a lot of the time. If somebody really wants to charge £500, and see how many people will turn up to see them, fine. If that's what they want to do. As you say, it's a free country. If you want to do that, but you should be transparent about it, and you shouldn't be actually creating an artificial stampede for tickets by using dodgy tactics. You shouldn't be making that money very, very opaque by hiding actually what that there's going to be booking fees added on, that you're going into a sale expecting that you're going to get your ticket for £100, and then suddenly you bounced into saying actually we've only got tickets worth £500 left now, even though it's actually the same ticket you would have bought an hour previously. All that is out of order, and that's the sort of thing that should be outlawed, and the sorts of things that really makes fans very angry. And if you look at in my report at the end at the sort of statistical graphs, the one thing where there's a sort of purple line where it says fans strongly disagree with something, the one thing where that purple line is huge, the purple block, it's on surge pricing is fair when demand for tickets is high. Strongly disagree kind of is a massive response from fans of that. So I think transparency is the thing, and people do not understand really what's going on here sometimes, but they know when they're getting ripped off. For example, one thing that gets my goat a lot and gets a lot of fans' goat is, additional fees on top of the ticket price. Now, I'm an artist and I say I want to keep ticket prices low for my fans. I don't want to charge more than, £40 for a ticket for this, this big theatre arena show, whatever it is I'm doing. That's fine. And then all of a sudden, if you find yourself paying £17.50 booking fees on top of that, you're thinking, well, where's that money going? And the truth is, sometimes some of that money is paying for maybe the ticketing website, the costs of that. But some of it is going in the pocket of the promoter. Some of it, actually, whisper it softly, is going in the pocket of the artist sometimes, and they're not telling us that. Their management are very carefully skimming their bit off it. Transparency is the key thing. And I think that's what we should make sure is happening. And that's why in terms of being fair to consumers in any marketplace, that's what should be happening. As again, we'll go back to the pre-digital age. Many of us probably joined a queue to buy some tickets somewhere in a record shop or somewhere for a gig, and we were at the back of the queue. We knew if we got to the front of the queue and there were any tickets left, we knew we could get them, for the advertised price. But online, what happens is a fake kind of urgency is created, a surge. Tickets are released in batches and so on in order to, maximize and shake down fans. And there's no transparency and clarity about it. Yeah. So that's what I'm calling for. The government has committed, albeit it's only publishing at this stage, a draft bill to outlaw secondary ticketing rip-off pricing. But we do also need to make sure that in the primary sector that it's being done fairly by the companies that are involved in it, and it is right that the competition authority should keep a very close eye on what's going on. The way is clearly set out.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the other topic, which is, I think, a big favourite, at least of our listeners, but probably in your data as well, which is the grassroots venue issue. It feels like grassroots venues are on a cliff top at the moment. We know that they're struggling. We know that they're closing at a really sort of scary rate. And the report also highlighted the fact that grassroots venues as a whole ran this huge collective shortfall. I think of it was in £76 million or something like that. There were recommendations in there as well. Before we dig into that, what's your sort of top line? Well, your feelings about grassroots venues and what needs to be done, but also what you saw in the fan survey, etc.
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a tightrope to walk with this, because you don't want to spread so much doom and gloom that you kind of it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are lots of venues out there that are doing amazing things and that are really doing pretty well. I mean, there's a venue in my own old constituency. I'm no longer a member of Parliament, but that I was talking to the owner there, and I think every event since Christmas bar a couple had been sold out because they've got they've got the right program, they've got the right email list with their regulars and so on, and they're bringing them the artists that they want in there, so that you can make a success story out of these things. They just need the right sort of public policy infrastructure support. Things like making sure that planning regulations at a local level are operating in such a way that it doesn't make life impossible for these venues. That the industry itself is understanding the importance of grassroots, and that has happened in the last couple of years with the creation of the Live Trust, which is a voluntary levy which is paid by larger arenas and stadiums, towards the grassroots infrastructure, not just the venues themselves, but also supporting acts to be able to play in some of those venues and get themselves started in their music careers. So I think there's some really positive things going on there, and the report is really saying let's have more of this. One thing I do say is it's my view that the government ought to at least take the reserve power to make the levy a statutory levy. In other words, make it the law that there should be a redistribution of a small amount of ticket takings from the larger venues down to the grassroots. Because what happens with these things sometimes is they start off quite well, and people pay into them, and then they lose a bit of impetus, and it goes away. But we're already seeing some of the benefits of it. There's some great innovations like venues building reasonably cheap accommodation that bands can stay in when they're at the venues, making sure they've all got a good back line, and all these lots of things. You can make sure they've got the right, in relation to another part of the report, the right kind of accessibility so that everybody can go along and enjoy their local grassroots venue. So I think there's loads of positive things going on, and we just need to do more of it.
And as you say, this is one of those topics that people are very passionate about, and it feels like in some ways grassroots venues are almost, if they're surviving, it's because they're undergoing this kind of modernization, which is a reflection of what people want and need. And there are, we're in a very different, we're going back in time again, Kevin, but it's very different to how it used to be, where, people would, they'd go out every Friday to the same venue, pay the same thing, see 3 bands, see their friends. I mean, that is not the social dynamic of the world anymore. So there's something else going on there, isn't there?
I think so. I think, we might have enjoyed going down a dingy staircase onto a sticky floor and, probably catching COVID, or it didn't exist back then or whatever. And if you saw anyone there over the age of 25, you'd say, "What are you doing here, Grandad?"
Exactly.
It's changed the live music scene, in that sense. And people, just as in every other area of life, looking for something more out of their grassroots, and something a bit different. And modernization is important, but I think these things do come in waves. And I have a kind of inner optimism that with some of the great talent that's coming through now, if they're given the opportunity at the grassroots, we can still have this amazing, vibrant live music scene we've always had in the UK.
Yeah, and that's when you zoom all the way out, that's really important as well, isn't it? We've seen the UK in recent years. Well, there are still huge international artists. Particularly last year, we saw some great successes globally of British artists. There is this sort of feeling that, whereas perhaps in the past the UK had this slight, let's say, Anglophone advantage, that is not the case anymore. The global music system is different. So it's really important to get these young emerging artists coming through, and as you said earlier, actually on a stage connecting with people, because you can't do everything on TikTok.
That's absolutely right, and clearly music has become more globalized by streaming, and there are lots of wonderful music from all around the world is now instantly available to people, and clearly people are enjoying that massively. But we still hugely punch above our weight, even though over our global share is not what it might once have been. As a country, we're still one of the few countries in the world that's a net exporter of music. We actually earn foreign currency from music. There's not many industries that's actually true of in the UK, and so we should nurture, cherish, and develop that. And this report is really partly about the R&D, the work that needs to be done to ensure we have that success into the future.
You mentioned there, obviously, grassroots venues,
have very tight margins, and this we've all seen this happen in big cities and towns where a music venue is part of the reason that a district becomes cool. Apartments get built or taken over. People move in because they want to go to the cool place, and then they complain about the music that made it cool in the first place. And that's something which hopefully in the future might be mitigated against. But there's acknowledging what you said earlier, that there's grassroots venues doing really well, but there's also that margin is really tight. We've spoken to people who run venues on the podcast, and they mentioned their margins are around 2%. What do we do, or what can be done about, in an immediate sense, for those venues that are struggling at the moment? Is there anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a number of recommendations actually in the reports under grassroots. So under those 7 sort of essentials I was talking about earlier, there's actually about 50 recommendations throughout the report. So lots of things are in there to do with how we can all help our local grassroots venues, like local councils, working together to support mentorship schemes for local promoters and so on. Things like the government making sure it takes powers in the ticketing legislation to do the mandatory levy, which I just talked about. Local authorities, venues, artists and fans working together to maintain up-to-date listings of what's going on, getting the information out there, what's going on at your local venue. A lot of people don't know, what's available to them in the locality. Getting artists and managers to let some of to play some of these venues. Sometimes some of the contractual obligations means they're not allowed to play in smaller venues, and that's very, very unfortunate, because these are the sorts of things that they could practically do to support them. Local authorities have been a bit more flexible about sometimes repurposing buildings, albeit sometimes on a temporary basis, to allow pop-up grassroots venues to happen. Make sure there's somebody in every council got music as in the cabinet in the council as part of their responsibilities directly on the council. And those sorts of practical measures. There's lots of things that can be done, that are helpful. And taken all together, you're not going to be able to always stop music venues closing down. The Music Venue Trust does a very good job of trying to step in where there's a problem and giving them an emergency kind of, audit and package to see if they can get them over the hump. But ultimately, it's a business, and you have got to, get people through the door and get some revenue in to be successful. But there's no need sometimes for some of these venues to go under when there could be help available that could keep them going.
Okay, so getting close to wrapping up here. So really, there's some interesting different angles here for the responsibility for the business itself. So of taking responsibility for what they're doing on a business level, and maybe accepting some changes and redistributing some money. And then on the governmental level, it's more sort of around encouraging change at a local level, and maybe making a few small things mandatory, levies and things like that, to sort of have this sort of cascading effect of change going forwards. Of course, if you're in and around Hull on the 10th, you'll be able to go to the Music Cities Convention and hear Kevin talking about this in much more detail. Final question then for you. If you were handed, this is hypothetical, if you were handed emergency dictatorial powers over urban and cultural policy for 24 hours, what's the biggest structural change you would make to this musical ecosystem, the live system, to sort of ensure that 10 years from now fans are protected, grassroots venues are thriving, and so on?
I think my glib answer would be I would instantly sort of make sure that all the recommendations in my report are implemented. If I was the benevolent dictator that you're allowing me to be, I probably dialing down into it though at a practical level. I think supporting grassroots artists and music venues is really important. So I think making sure that something like the Live Trust levy has a longer term future and can support grassroots music is a thing that I'd like to see happen.
All right. So thank you very much. I think this is something which we're going to hear from our listeners about, because it's something that, as I said, they're very passionate about. And I will link to the report, but on the podcast, so people can read it for themselves. And of course, on Music Ally, we'll keep reporting on it as things develop. So thanks ever so much for coming back on the podcast, Kevin, and hopefully we'll get you back in a reasonable amount of time to see how things are developing when all these recommendations have been unilaterally approved. And
I'll come and talk my next album, which I'm recording at the moment. So.
Oh, right. Well, tell us about that if you've got time.
It's too early yet. But the work in progress. The old one's still there on Spotify. The Clown and the Cigarette Girl.
I will link to that as well.
I've been streamed by dozens of people across the world. So.
I respect your hustle. That's spoken like a true artist. Thanks for the quick plug as well. Okay, Kevin, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, part 2 of our interview this week. Very happy to welcome Shain Shapiro to the podcast. Shain, you're founder of Sound Diplomacy, and you have organised the Music Cities Convention in Hull, where you'll be speaking with Lord Kevin Brennan later this week. First of all, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you as well, mate.
Always a pleasure. Can you just... We've already heard from Kevin. Can you just give us a quick overview of what your work is? What do you do as part of Sound Diplomacy and everything else? And how does that sort of fit what is going on with Lord Brennan and the review?
Yeah, we're an economic consulting company. We work with cities, governments, and the private sector really to incorporate music and the creative economy into economic strategy, into city planning, into, the things I feel that are really important to focus on that make cities and places worth living in. Mm-hmm. So we provide a lot of the data really to help back up the work that Lord Brennan and others are doing.
Yeah.
So, especially across economic data, looking at, jobs, GDP, revenue in local places, impact on local people, and things like that.
Okay. And you released a book, I think, was it late last year or early this year? I can't remember now. The time is mixing into...
No, it was September 2023.
Oh,
so nearly 2.5 years
when
ago.
you hit a certain age, time just blends into one long ductile string after that point. But you released this book called This Must Be the Place, and it's about how music can make your city better. And it argues very strongly for how placing music at the heart of a city's character and identity, but also its functionality, education, all these other things that you mentioned around how a city works is a really important thing. And that sort of jives with the parliamentary report's findings in a way. And one of the key things that we touched on in the interview with Kevin was that live music should be treated as a public good, and that puts it alongside public libraries, museums, sport facilities, things like that. Can you expand on this concept? First of all, what the public good idea is and how that would relate to music?
Yeah, well, again, a city or a place really is just a set of decisions and priorities that we're taking together, right? We choose what to care about, what not to care about, what to invest in, what not to invest in, right? Build that road over there, don't repave that road over here. Housing goes over there, a shop goes over here. That's all these things are, right? Some, there are things in cities that are set up for essentially private consumption, like a private home, right? And then there are things that we all need that if they did not exist, it would make all our lives worse. Pavements, right? For example, or no, really, we think about this. We rarely think about this, but all of these things had to be decided by somebody at some point. So we have agreed that there are just certain things that we do not attach, let's say, purely commercial economic thinking towards, but decide that these things are good. And every culture is different. We believe the NHS, right, is worth paying for, so we pay for it. We believe that public libraries are worth paying for, so we pay for it. I believe that the argument that Lord Brennan is saying, and I agree, even though it's a little bit more nuanced, obviously, than providing healthcare, is that access to live music or access to music kind of in a congregational way. And I don't mean that religiously. I just mean that, you want to limit barriers so that people can have it in their lives in one way or another. That needs to be a strategy in cities. That therefore means that we need to make a decision that it matters and then prioritize doing stuff around it. So, his thinking and with the ticket, with the fan report.
Yeah.
There are so many reports. It's and I think it's fantastic is that really they drew this line between kind of how we respect and how we engage with football fans, or sporting fans, and how society kind of engages with and respects live music fans, and that they are kind of seen quite differently, right? Is that there's a lot more agency that football fans have in terms of the decisions that get made within football. Yes, some clubs more than others. And this is not the way that we think around live music. And that means, a lot of the community festivals that existed back in the 80s and 90s no longer exist anymore, right? We have prioritized our public spaces. We have created an environment that makes it very difficult to sustain community venues because, there's very little tax incentive. It's quite expensive to run these things in a variety of ways. If we treated live music as a public good, then we would identify ways to make it more accessible, financially accessible, literally accessible. But that is something that we have to all choose to do and say, this matters to us, so we're going to do it. And I don't think that has been a decision that we've all collectively taken yet in the UK.
Do you think that you mentioned there the sort of loss of community-oriented festival, community-oriented music spaces. In brief, why has that happened? Has that been because we've just sort of said, oh, well, it's not that important, it's just a sort of community venue?
No, we all have like historical amnesia in many respects, right? It's like if you go back to before the GLA, the Greater London Authority existed, right? The mayor's office here in London, there was an organization called the GLC, the Greater London Council, right? And it used to organize free festivals all the time, right? In parks. And there are still lots of these things happening in communities. My local community has a few of these, but they're far less well known and they're far less active. And we kind of see them as a nice to have, not rather than a need to have.
Right.
And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens behind the scenes that people don't recognize in terms of how land is governed, how businesses are licensed, what we put financial barriers on and what we don't put financial barriers on, how tax works, how that is charged, and so on. That I'm not saying disincentivize, but make it more difficult to run a space for social benefit, right? So that's the issue. And, so it forces you as a live music operator, to really, you have to find ways to make money, right? To pay your bills. And that then sometimes depreciates the time you have to focus on how to engage with the local community for community benefits.
So what are those benefits? Can you sort of briefly outline, if this is done in a sense where you're building an environment that is placing music in this role, what's the benefit?
Yeah, it's that. So I'm writing another book. It comes out in February, and a lot of it is based on this kind of stuff. And I think that one of the things that we have seen, this isn't just live music, is I think there's kind of two kinds of music, if you bear with me, right? There's music as a noun, right? Music that we consume, music that we listen to, music that is ours. And then music as a verb, music that we participate in, right? We have built an entire society and structure that really prioritizes music as a noun, right? We're listening to more music than we ever have in any period of time, yet we're participating in it less.
Yeah.
Right? And we've kind of deprioritized music as a verb. That, everything from privatizing private space, right? Privatizing public space, my apologies. To reducing the incentives to put a choir on in a community center, right? And I think that this then makes it harder on everybody. So look at the world that we're living in right now, right? We are the most connected world in the world that we've ever had, yet we are more divided than we've ever been. And I believe that music, as one of the things that really cuts through division, can be a tool to really, support people talking to each other and engaging with each other and communicating with each other as human beings in communities. And we're losing that, right? So, people are retreating to their phones, and they're retreating to YouTube and to TikTok, and they're not as engaged in, traditional or old school forms of community building. And I think that if we had a better strategy to incorporate live music in whatever way, whether it's a choir or, bagpipes or a rock band, I don't really care. But I think that we need to really think about what the role of music is in making us happier, the role of music in making us less lonely, the role of music in making us look at a human being and not look at them with suspicion, but look at them with, openness. And I think the fan review kind of hints at all this kind of stuff. And I think by purely focusing on music as a noun, we are losing sight of what it's actually for and what it actually can do for us as a society. That's essentially the crux of my new book, which I think I'm going to have to improve the elevator pitch before it comes out, but I'm getting there.
If you get the title, nail the title, and then everything will follow. That's
the book is called "How Music Can Save the World."
Okay, well that's that's nice and clear. Okay, good. Coming soon, folks.
February 9th.
There it is. Wow, you have the actual date. Okay, no pressure. Get writing. So, and I guess that's partly what this piece of work that is happening at the moment is this review, which is to gather all this on a national level, all this information, and say, right, these are the needs and voices and concerns of the people, right? So when we get back down to that sort of a listener local level, and okay, they speak up, they talk to the council, they talk to their local representatives and say, look, this concerns me, and I see things going the wrong way from where me and my representative community feel it's going. What changes can then actually happen on the ground?
I think, everything, agency is built through congregation, right? The more people saying something about something, usually the bigger chance it'll happen. That's why you need 100,000 signatures to get a petition debated in Parliament, right? The whole concept of one of the ideas in this report, which I love, and I'm a huge fan of Lord Brennan, by the way. What an incredible asset he is to the music economy and the music industry in this country, to have elected leaders who care and play in bands. So creating these kind of fan association idea, local fan associations for music, you get one person saying something needs to change, fine. You get a couple hundred people saying something needs to change. You'd be surprised how easier it is to have a debate around changing it. So if every town in the country and city had a live music association or fan infrastructure that was able to communicate with one voice, that would force local councils to engage more strategically. It just would. My in-laws are from Rugby, right? And Rugby is a town that doesn't really have a music venue. I think there is obviously live music there. There's also live music there, but it doesn't have a grassroots music venue as far as I know. And if listeners correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm like, imagine if there was like a Rugby live, music fan association, even if it was a couple hundred people. And I know there are thousands of people that live in Rugby that love live music. And they went to the council with one voice and said, this is good for the economy of the town. This is good to help rejuvenate our local high streets. This is good for our mental health, it would force the council to respond. Let alone, what if one of these people actually ran in the next elections and became a councillor? over time, you'd be surprised that agency gets built up. So the whole purpose of this report is like sowing the seeds of agency. And that is how things change.
Right.
And, we can't forget how far we've come in the last 10 years in this country. We're in a much better place now in terms of advocacy for music than we were when I started doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we always say, every time you gain more interest and success, you create a new problem. Yeah. So it's like, right? It's suddenly people care. Caring creates challenges. So the report's advocacy idea of creating these fan associations, I think is brilliant, and I am all for it.
And that's certainly the kind of thing I think, having had discussions with our listeners over the last year or so, that's the kind of thing that they would love to do. We've got listeners out there who get involved with local venues, get on the board or the Music Venue Trust and things like that. So this is the kind of thing that would attract people who really do care about it. And again, it's a bit of guidance, isn't it, to help these things form, and then people generally know how to take things forward once they've given that framework, right? Final question. I'm going to give you the same question that I gave to Lord Brennan, okay? And it gives you a chance to flex your dictatorial powers, or at least imaginarily for a moment. If you were handed total control over cultural and urban policy for 24 hours, what's the single big change you would make to the music ecosystem to ensure that in sort of 10 years or so from now, fans are feeling more protected around ticketing and the things they talked about in the review, and grassroots venues in the way that they could be are thriving?
Could I do two things?
Sure, yeah. You're the dictator now, so yeah.
I would reduce VAT on cultural use in tickets to at least 10% rather than 20%. Mm-hmm. And I would create a carve out in our property tax valuation system in terms of how business rates are calculated for cultural use. And I would create an incentive or an exemption so that if there is a specific cultural use that is being monitored and that you are delivering social and cultural benefit to your community, then you get a discount on your business rates, much like if you're a charity or a CIC.
And those are two things I think will resonate with all our listeners, actually. They make sense. And the kind of thing that they could propose in these local fan groups as well, at least push the message upwards, I guess.
Yeah, the fact that the quid on ticket, the levy, is still subject to VAT. Yes. So for every pound, 20p goes back to the exchequer. We need, again, we have to pay for the NHS and social care and everything, right? Business rates are a way to do that. That obviously is a way to do that. But the fact that you have music venues paying more than distribution centers or football stadiums in business rates, and we don't have a system that is modern enough to understand that what happens inside the building is more important than the value of the dirt it sits on.
Yeah.
And we need a system that recognizes that. And I think that if I was Lisa and Andy for a day or whatever, that's what I would advocate for.
All right. Shain, a thought occurred to me as we were talking that Lord Kevin Brennan told us that he's working on some new music. You're working on a book. I'm just saying, joint headline tour next springtime, you and Lord Brennan could be the dream ticket for everybody. So I'm just putting that idea out there now. Until then, Shain Shapiro, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And there we go. Big thanks again to Lord Kevin Brennan and Shain Shapiro for joining us. That's it from us this week. Thanks to you too for listening. If you're enjoying the show, as ever, please do spread the word, click the stars, the thumbs up, and leave a comment, etc. It really does help us. And you can support us as well, if you'd like, via Patreon and sign up to become a superfan, which also gets you access to our weekly lock-in, where you get to stay behind after hours for an extra 15 to 20 minutes of bonus material every week. You can gain access to that, like I said, by becoming a superfan at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. That's patreon.com/the the slice of music, the price of music even. Alternatively, if you'd like to get in touch with us about anything at all, anything we've discussed today on recent programs, or any questions you have about how the music industry works, throw us the question and I will set our intrepid reporter, Stuart Dredge, off to research and bring you the answers. You can't say fairer than that. So drop us a line with your questions. It's The Price of Music Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. That's The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. Thanks for joining us as ever. I've been Joe Sparrow. We'll be joined again, of course, by Stuart Dredge next week, and we hope to see you then. Bye-bye.